I stand in the courtroom with my palms pressed flat on the lectern. The room hums with whispers. Cameras flash like thunder. Investors, reporters, and board members fill the seats. David sits at counsel's table. He looks as calm as if we were at a dinner party. The judge clears his throat. He asks if I have anything to say before we start. My voice trembles at first. Then it finds steel. I point at David. I lift a thin ledger I handed the clerk. The pages are tight and full. I say, "You swore to me you'd protect this company, now you're fired." The words land like a stone. David goes white. Some people around me gasp. Someone whispers, "Wait, what does that ledger mean?" I breathe in and let the noise fade. I did not plan to shout. But I did plan this moment. 7 years of a marriage and the company are on a scale in that room. The cameras lean forward. The judge nods. Papers rustle. I have one chance to make the truth plain. I remember the vows, but the memory is not like the present. The memory will show how promises turned into a crime. I am ready to tell it. I remember our wedding day like a bright photograph. We stood beneath a low arch of wildflowers. I said, "I do." I meant every word. David smiled at me like a man who keeps secrets in his pocket. He promised to be my partner in life and business. My father had passed 2 years before. He left me the company. It was small then. I grew it. I learned every part of it by night and by day. David joined as CEO. He seemed steady. He was kind in public. He held my hand during hard days. I remember the night before our honeymoon. He shrugged at a small thing. Felt like nothing then. Now I see that shrug like a crack in glass. We toasted with cheap champagne in a tiny hotel room. We laughed at the jet lag ahead. He leaned in and said, "I've got you." I believed him. Belief is a funny thing. Can make you blind. I did not know then how soon the blindness would end. 6 months before the courtroom, I noticed a strange bank transfer. It was late on a Thursday. The ledger showed a 6-figure debit. The label read, "Operational expense." My heart skipped. I asked David about it at dinner. He brushed it off with a joke. "Just vendor stuff," he said. His laugh sounded like rain on glass. I did what I always do. I took a screenshot. I saved it to a folder on my computer labeled "Check Later." The label felt silly even then. I was tired of finding surprises in our accounts. That night I went to bed thinking it was nothing. In the morning the folder was missing on my laptop. I remember the cold sickness that crawled up my spine. I checked the bank again. The wire had moved. The beneficiary changed names twice. The line looked clean. Who moves 6 figures with a clean line and no notice? I made a note to myself to ask the CFO. I meant to wait, but something in me would not let it go. A text came from a co-founder at 9 in the morning. "Payroll is late," she wrote. Teams in Southeast Asia had no money in their accounts. The message was short and sharp like a cold wind. I called the CFO. He said it was a banking glitch. David told a press interview that he handled it. But my mind kept circling that missing folder. I dug into the company accounts. I checked vendor lists and wire confirmations. My stomach dropped. Salaries had been rerouted to a shell entity called Aurora Partners. I Googled Aurora Partners. No real address. P.O. Box. A phone that went to a recorded message. I felt a hollow space open inside me. I traced invoices back and found matching names that did not exist. The money was thin air and then gone. I tried to find people at Aurora. There were none. Just phantom names and phantom accounts. The thought that someone inside our house could do this made me think of the small shrug before the honeymoon. I closed my eyes and thought of my team waiting for pay. That night I sat David down at our kitchen table. The light was low. We have always eaten together there. I asked him about the transfers. He smiled and said, "Just vendor stuff." He told me not to worry. I told him payroll was late. He waved it away and said the bank would fix it. He put his hand over mine like an old friend. I wanted to believe him. I asked about the calls and the late nights. He said he had meetings. His phone chimed. He hid it on his knee. He told me not to poke around. "Trust me," he said. His voice sounded soft but his eyes were thin. I left the house to walk and think. I wanted air. As I walked down the block he called. I recorded the call on impulse. He warned me again to stop investigating. The warning crawled under my skin. Recording a call felt wrong. But fear makes you act in ways you did not plan. I kept the recording. I tucked it away like a small secret. A week later I searched our cloud backups for a file. I found a photo David had tried to delete. It showed him at a restaurant with a woman who was not a client. David held a folder. On the folder was a logo I did not know. On the back of the photo someone had written, Aurora, closing. My breath went shallow. I forwarded the image to my locked evidence folder. I remembered a time months before when David panicked about a missing thumb drive. He had cursed like a man who lost a key. That memory felt sudden and important. The thumb drive reappeared one day later in a place only I and David knew. I could not tell if that meant he had moved it or if someone else had. I plugged the thumb drive into an air-gapped laptop. Inside was a nest of spreadsheets, vendor invoices, a line item labeled CEO disbursement. My hands trembled. Wire traces showed an offshore account in the Cayman Islands. The account used an alias tied to David. The numbers were ugly and direct. I printed the files. I put them in a safe deposit box. I scheduled a meeting with the board. On my way to the bank someone followed me. A black SUV tailed me on the drive to the bank. I saw it in my rearview mirror and my stomach tightened. At a stoplight the SUV slowed and my fear rose like smoke. When I got out of the car there was a sticky note on my windshield. One word was written in black marker. Quiet. The paper stuck to the glass like a warning. I wanted to tell David. I wanted to call the police. I wanted to hide the thumb drive and never speak of it again. David said, "You're being paranoid." He asked me to calm down. I stared at him and found anger. He had lied. He had stepped into rooms where I should have been beside him. I began to write down every time he missed dinner or was unreachable. I numbered them. My notes became a list of absences. In one notebook I wrote down a phone number I found in records. It led to a burner phone. The burner had thousands of encrypted messages. The thought that he had built a second life with a second phone felt like walking on ice. I found a receipt from the restaurant in the deleted photo. It matched the night David said he had a late meeting. The receipt had an address. I followed it. The address led to a house with kids' toys on the lawn. I felt sick. I searched public records and found a marriage certificate. David was listed as husband to another woman in another state. My world tilted. He had another name there. He had been living two lives. I thought of vows. I thought of the small hands my father used to hold when he showed me how to sign a check. I thought of all the nights David had promised he had meetings. I wanted to scream. When I confronted David, he laughed in a way that made me feel small. He had an answer for everything, smooth and quick. He said the certificate was a mistake. He said the other woman was involved in a business deal. His calm felt like a mask. A lawyer arrived at my office the next day. He introduced himself as David's counsel. He did not ask for documents. He demanded I stop touching company funds and hand over files. The words landed like a fist. He spoke of countersuits and mismanagement. The board looked nervous in the meeting room. I filed a motion to audit the accounts. The court calendar was months away. One board member quietly suggested a settlement. He said a settlement would be cleaner for everyone. I refused. The company was my father's life. I had carried it through nights of worry. I would not be bought out with cheap talk. That night I found a note in the office trash. It read in a shaky hand, "If she moves to litigate, expose her family." The ink looked fresh. I felt the air go out of me. Someone wanted to weaponize my life if I fought back. The stakes were not just money. I called an old friend who knew a private investigator. I told her to look quietly. We needed someone who could move without noise. The PI was a woman named Rosa. She moved like a shadow and had a steady voice. She had found fraud before and she did not waste sentiment. Her report came back like rain. Shell companies, false vendor contracts, invoices that paid out to names that did not exist. A hotel registry showed David's name at the same time he billed clients in a different city. Rosa handed me an envelope with a judge's seal. Someone had subpoenaed key evidence already. I could not tell who. I felt like I was on a wire strung over a dark room. Each step made a noise. The junior accountant sent me an anonymous message soon after. It pointed to a Dropbox link. I opened it with hands that shook. Inside were months of internal memos showing David directing funds. There were messages where he told the junior accountant to be quiet. One note read like a threat. The accountant named another executive who had been complicit. The note hinted at a backdoor login that could trace transactions. We had a thread to pull. I had Rosa plant a small bug in David's study. It felt like a betrayal and also a necessary act. One night the bug recorded a voicemail where David boasted about playing both sides and keeping the company in his name if I stumbled. The recording was ugly. It was a man speaking in the dark with plans like numbers. Make sure the company stays in my name. My counsel told me the recording was a gray area. We can't use that in court unless you can prove chain of custody, they said. The law is a fence you must build to hold truth inside. I contacted an old law professor who volunteered to help with chain steps. He showed me how to authenticate backups and email headers. He taught me to keep an iron track of evidence. We mapped how to verify emails, file times, and the bugged recording. I had to make a sealed package for the court that could not be cracked on a whim. Just as we finished, my office line buzzed. A reporter left a message. You'll want to know. Someone leaked half your evidence online. I felt hollow. The leak landed on a gossip blog. Redacted files and a short, wicked headline said, CEO in turmoil. Company at risk. The stock dipped. Employees panicked. Rumors grew like mold. David's camp used the leak to say I was unfit to lead. They said that the chaos proved I could not run a company. The board called emergency legal counsel. But the leak also revealed a hidden spreadsheet I had not seen. It listed direct wire transfers to a name I did not recognize. C. Harrow. I stared at the screen. The letters looked like a code. Under the leak, one commenter wrote a hint. A link to a hometown blog. I clicked. The blog showed a faded yearbook photo with scrawled nicknames. I found a face that looked like David in his youth. The name scrawled across it was C. Harrow. I sat back like a struck animal. He had been using nostalgic code names to hide transfers. The ledger had a memo. Settlement plan. It was dated the week before our wedding. Someone had planned parts of this before we ever said vows. I found a letter from my father tucked in a drawer in his old office. The paper smelled faintly of his cologne. He had written to me before he died. He warned me to vet anyone who coveted the company. He told me to trust my instincts. He named two initials I had always dismissed. I tracked down one name. It led to David's college roommate, now an East Coast attorney. I drove to his address and knocked on a door marked with years in silence. He would not speak at first. Then he slid an envelope under the door. Inside was an address and a flight itinerary. The flight was for David. It left at dawn for an island. I felt every part of me tighten like a drawn wire. He planned to leave. He thought he could take what he wanted. I called Rosa and the attorney. We moved fast to get a court order. If he tried to abscond the assets, we needed to freeze everything. We prepared to intercept him at the airport. I had a strange steadiness then. Fear made my aim sharp. At the airport, David moved like a man who expected favors. He smiled at the check-in agent and tried to charm his way through security. He carried a small leather bag and a watch that glittered. Customs flagged his passport. There was an old arrest warrant in another state for fraud related to a company he once ran. The warrant had never been served. Someone in the courthouse had blocked it. I felt a hot rush of anger. How many rules did he bend to slip through life? He boarded anyway. I had a court order to freeze assets, but the flight had already pushed back. I felt like I had run out of time. Rosa and I watched him go. He sat by the window and looked calm like a man who knows how to walk away. On the plane, he was a little too polished. He bought a bottle of water like a man who buys kindness. I called my attorney and begged for more. We had to stop him. But the world moves in steps and steps take time. Back in court the next week, the proceedings became a theatrical fight. David's lawyers accused me of espionage and of fabricating evidence. They whispered I had affairs with investors. They used everything they could to plant doubt. The judge listened with a face like dust. He seemed tired and ready to dismiss. My legal team asked for a continuance. I heard someone murmur that, "This judge likes to protect big names." Then the junior accountant burst into the courthouse carrying new documents. He was pale and shaking, but he spoke truth. He said he found files in David's private desk that were not in the shared drives. He handed them to the clerk. The courtroom held its breath. The papers showed a notarized contract transferring ownership the week after our marriage. The contract had a second signature in invisible ink. Invisible ink sounded like a story from a child's book. But the test revealed the second signature in the right light. The design was for a takeover if I ever stepped away. The room made a small sound like a tide. One of the notarized signatures belonged to the board member who had suggested buying me out. I stared at the paper like it would explain everything. Confronted with the evidence, he crumbled. He confessed he had been promised cushy rolls at Aurora Partners if he cooperated. He said he had been threatened. He named an accounting firm that had been laundering the funds. He told us David had a backup plan. A pre-signed letter to the bank to freeze my corporate access if litigation began. I felt my chest catch. I called the bank. The bank called back and revealed someone had attempted that freeze the night before. They had failed because the bank required 2 signatures and my father's legacy pin. The board member's voice shook as he told us how he had signed and lied. He wanted immunity and offered testimony. I felt a mix of relief and nausea. The house of cards was wobbling. Men who had seemed strong were small and scared when the light grew bright. Rosa tracked down the accounting firm. The firm had a small office in a bland building. Their records were clean on the surface. But Rosa found emails that spoke in code. We watched as a pattern formed. Transfers from our payroll to dummy vendors. Then transfers to Aurora. Then offshore wireouts. We held evidence up like a lantern. The more we found, the more their story bent. I sat with my attorney and we made a plan for chain of custody. We met another whistleblower who had access to the bank logs. He said he would testify. But he looked afraid. He said, "You need to make sure I am safe." We arranged protection. We gave him contact numbers and a place to stay. This all felt bigger than me. It was not only my money. It was my team, my father's name, and the people who trusted us. I slept in short stretches. Each dream was a stairwell with a light that went out at the wrong time. I found a letter from my father in a drawer of his old oak desk. The handwriting swayed like his voice. He told me to vet those who wanted the company. He wrote to trust myself. He had underlined 2 initials. I had never thought they meant much. Now they were like small nails in a wall. One name led me to David's college roommate who refused to talk. But he slid an envelope with a flight itinerary under his door. The itinerary was for David on a private flight the next morning. The destination was an island. He was leaving. I felt a cold focus settle. I called the court and told them about the flight. We rushed to get an order in place to freeze assets. The morning came and David moved like a man who believed laws bend for him. Security asked him a question and he smiled like it was a joke. The customs hold found the old warrant. Someone had tried to hide it. The man who hid it had power. In court, David's lawyers changed tactics. They launched a scorched earth defense. They smeared me. They called my motives into question. They tried to make the story about my character. The judge listened and looked heavy. I felt the weight of the room press down on me. My cheap suit felt like armor that had been dented. Then the junior accountant ran in with a new set of papers. He had been in David's private desk. He had pulled out files no one had seen. Those files included a notarized plan to transfer ownership and pre-signed letters to banks. One of the notarized signatures belonged to the board member who had tried to buy me out. When the clerk read the papers aloud, the courtroom shifted. You could feel it. The small storm of gossip around me quieted, and a new current of real danger rose. David's face went tight. He opened his mouth and closed it. I thought of my father's handwriting again and felt a slow, steady rage. The complicit board member broke under pressure. He confessed he had been promised roles at Aurora and had been threatened. He spoke about late-night calls and veiled promises. He named the accounting firm and the man who handled the wire transfers. He told the court about a pre-signed freeze letter meant to cut me out. The bank called and asked to testify. A compliance officer came to court and read logs aloud. Someone had tried to freeze my accounts the night before. The officer read a scribbled note found on a bank printout. Do it before she realizes. The room held its breath. David's lawyer tried to object and failed. The evidence had weight. Each testimony was a nail pounded into a board. The story built itself like a house. I sat and watched facts march across the room. I felt the old fear of losing everything tighten, and then begin to relax as truth took shape. After the bank testimony, the judge asked David if he had anything to say. He stood and his voice was very small. The man who had been loud in private was silent in public. I slid a final piece of evidence across the table. It was a video message David had recorded for investors. In it he promised to lie for them if needed. He called me the face. The tape played. His smile was a curl of cold. He said words about control and legacy. He sounded like a man granting himself permission. The judge watched the screen. He signed an order removing David as an officer of the company. He froze assets and referred the matter to criminal prosecutors. I watched the color drain from David's face. He had planned many steps. He had not planned this. When the judge spoke, it was like a bell. The weight of accusation became action. People around me whispered. Reporters scribbled. My knees felt weak and then strong. After the hearing, the board met again. The man who had tried to buy me out now offered full cooperation. He gave a list of names and a file of transactions. They named the accounting firm and the shell entities it had used. The board took a hard line. They moved to restore my control publicly and to ask for official apologies. Public relations churned out statements. Investors stirred and then rallied. A founder who had once been cold called to apologize. I felt a strange relief. The fight had been more than money. It was about truth. The bank found an attempt to freeze my accounts. The printout showed handwriting that matched David's notes. The bank officer said someone had been told to do it before she realizes. I sat with my hands folded and let the moment wash over me. The slow work of building something out of rubble had begun again. The prosecutors opened a preliminary inquiry. They asked for the thumb drive and all the original backups. I handed over boxes of papers with a strange calm. They called Rosa and the whistleblowers. They interviewed the accountant and the bank officer. Their questions were precise and cold like a scalpel. Rosa told them about hotel registries and burner phones. The junior accountant gave testimony about threats and invoices. I watched as pieces of our life that had seemed personal were translated into facts. The law turned my anger into evidence. The board issued a public apology and voted to reinstate me as CEO. They said they had been wrong. They promised to move to repair trust. In private, one investor who had spread rumors about my leadership approached me. He offered to buy a controlling stake from Aurora's collapsed shell. He wanted to clean things up. I thought about offers and power. I thought about rebuilding on my terms. Court day arrived for the final hearing. The whistleblowers testified under oath. The junior accountant spoke with hands that did not shake as much as before. The bank officer read the note aloud again. Do it before she realizes. A hush fell. David's lawyer made one last attempt to paint me as reckless. He failed. David stood and tried to deny it. The video played again. His voice was stripped of charm. He looked like a man reduced by his own hands. The judge issued an order removing David from any position in the company. He froze David's assets and sent the file to prosecutors for criminal investigation. I felt a long exhale that was not only relief but a kind of grief. I had lost years of trust. I had also found new strength. The board stood and apologized in public. Investors shifted their stance. The company began to mend. After the court, I stood at the rooftop of the company building. The skyline was a row of small bright promises. I let the wind press against my coat and I breathed. Days later, the public apology had softened the market. An investor who once spread rumors bought back a controlling stake from Aurora's collapsed shell. He offered me a clean slate and resources to rebuild. I thought of my father's letter and of Rosa and of the whistleblowers who stood when truth mattered. I thought of the small voice inside me that said, "Keep going." My phone buzzed on my palm. An unexpected message came from someone who believed in second chances. I looked at it and smiled. I had said, "I do" once to a man who promised to be my partner. Today I had said, "You're fired" to that same man in a courtroom. Both words had weight. I walked back inside and felt the floor steady under my feet. I said it aloud again for myself. I said "I do" once, but today I said "You're fired," and I meant both.